Today, we're diving into a political drama that played out in Oklahoma, but this one has huge real-world stakes for the disability community. It's a story that has it all: a popular bill, a governor's really surprising veto, and a legislature that just wasn't having it and decided to fight back. So let's break down what happened and why this story matters way beyond Oklahoma's state lines.
And this is really the question at the heart of the whole thing. I mean, on the surface, a law that's designed to stop service dog fraud seems like a total no-brainer, right? So what was actually going on behind the scenes that led to such a major political showdown?
And what a showdown it was. Here's how it all went down, and it happened fast. In April 2025, a bill, House Bill 1178, passes with a ton of support. Then, just a couple of weeks later, boom, the governor vetoes it. But, and this is a big deal, the story doesn't stop there. By the end of May, in a really rare and powerful move, the legislature overrides that veto, making it law anyway.
Okay, so to really get what this whole fight was about, we first have to understand the problem the bill was trying to solve. This wasn't just some random law. It was a direct response to a very real and honestly a growing crisis.
So what's the big deal? Well, at its core, the problem is this: more and more people are just passing off their regular, untrained pets as highly trained service animals. And look, this isn't some harmless little fib. It creates this whole cascade of serious problems for the people who actually need these dogs to live their lives.
And that's where the real damage starts. It's like a domino effect. When a fake service dog acts up in a store, the business owners get suspicious. So next time, they might question or even illegally deny access to a legitimate service dog team. It just chips away at public trust and turns what should be a simple trip to the grocery store into this incredibly stressful and sometimes hostile situation for a person with a disability.
And this quote from a disability advocate, wow, it just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? The very people who need our support are the ones being directly harmed by this kind of fraud. It's a direct assault on their rights and their freedom to just exist in public spaces safely.
So you're probably thinking, why can't the store owner just call them out on it? Well, it's not that simple. Under the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, a business is legally only allowed to ask these two very specific questions. This was done to protect people's privacy, which is a good thing. But it creates this massive loophole. If someone is willing to lie, the business owner's hands are pretty much tied.
And that is exactly what brings us back to the political fight. We have a clear problem, right? So why was there such a huge disagreement at the highest levels of government on how to fix it? Let's break down the two sides of this argument.
So on one side, you had the governor. He was operating from this broader philosophy of wanting to shrink the state's criminal code. To him, creating a new misdemeanor crime just looked like more government overreach. But the legislature was looking at it from a totally different angle. For them, this wasn't about overreach. It was about plugging a very specific legal hole that was causing real harm to their constituents.
Now, the governor's other big point was, hey, we've already got the federal ADA. That should be enough. But here's the thing advocates were quick to point out. The ADA is a civil rights law. It sets the rules, sure, but it has no criminal penalties for an individual who just lies about their dog. And as they argued, a law without any real consequences is basically just a suggestion.
So you can probably guess how this veto went over with the disability community. They were, to put it mildly, not happy. They felt like the governor's decision basically sent a green light that this kind of fraud was okay. It left them feeling totally unprotected and just felt like a complete disconnect from the hostility they often face every single day.
But then, the legislature did something pretty dramatic. They stepped in, and by overriding the veto, they made HB 1178 the law of the land whether the governor likes it or not. So what does this new law actually change?
Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. The law creates a misdemeanor offense. This means things like fines or community service. And pay really close attention to that word knowingly. This law isn't designed to go after people who are just confused about the rules. It is specifically aimed at people who are intentionally lying to get access they know they're not entitled to.
And you can really see the before and after effect here. Before this law, if you were a handler, you faced harassment and had little backup. If you were a business owner, you had no legal recourse. And if you were the one committing fraud, nothing. Zero consequences. But now, handlers have stronger protections, businesses have a clear law they can point to, and the people committing the fraud, well, they now face actual penalties.
And look, while this all went down in Oklahoma, this story is way bigger than just one state. It really taps into a much larger national conversation about the difference between having rights on paper and being able to actually use those rights in the real world.
Get this, over 30 other states already have laws just like this one. So Oklahoma wasn't really doing something radical here. They were basically just catching up to what most of the country had already figured out, that this is a real problem that federal law alone just can't solve.
And a huge part of the problem comes down to just a lot of confusion and myths out there. So let's clear a few of those up right now. First, myth. There is no official government-run certification or ID card for service dogs. Doesn't exist. Second, they are not legally required to wear a vest. And third, and this is a big one, emotional support animals, while incredibly important, do not have the same public access rights as service dogs under the ADA. These are all really common misunderstandings.
So what's the bottom line in all of this? What's the big takeaway? It's that disability rights, even when they're protected by federal law, often really depend on the political will at the state level to create protections that are actually meaningful and enforceable. Without that, a right can exist on paper but be almost impossible to defend in your day-to-day life.
When you strip everything else away, the whole fight in Oklahoma really came down to this one simple, powerful idea. The legislature's override was a clear message that for them, for their constituents, and for advocates everywhere, disability rights are simply not up for debate.
And that leaves us with one last really important question. The bill is now the law, which is a huge victory for advocates. But is the fight really over? Because, now comes the hard part, making sure the law is actually understood, that it's applied fairly, and that it's enforced. As this whole story proves, sometimes passing the law is just the beginning of the battle.